You're listening to a Comics XF podcast.
X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where we normally rank every story from A to Z.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Zach. And Adam, it's the new year.
It is. Happy New Year. Happy 2026.
We're excited to get into all that brings. It's at least a different date on the calendar, and that's mentally important.
Well, it's not just a new year, but X-Men is going through a little bit of a change. We're moving from the Ashes era of the last year and a half into something new called, I believe, Shadows of Tomorrow, including X-Men United. And we figured it would be a good opportunity to talk to one of the creators behind one of those books. So who is joining us today, Zach?
You may know him from books like All Against All or Friendo. You may know him from the Teenage Mutant Turtles Casey Jones book, or you may know him from some of the Infinity comics or the book Sentinels that came out last year. It's Alex Paknadel. Hey, Alex, how we doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Happy New Year to everybody.
We are pumped to jump into this because you got a interesting book that you have coming out. I believe it goes on FOC on the 12th. So if folks are interested, definitely go and pre-order ahead of that. But it's Cyclops. What's up with that?
Yeah, I was as surprised as you were, or you are, or as anyone listening is. I took a wild swing. I pitched it, and they went for it, and now I'm terrified. But I did my best.
So let's talk about that. Cyclops, obviously, I would argue, is the main character of X-Men. And largely that, while it's a team book, I feel like for the last, say, 15 to 20 years, most of the team has been centered around what he has going on, even if he is not the most popular character. Like that's Storm, Wolverine. They probably, my wife knows them better than Cyclops. But like he's been the center of the books. And I think putting him into a solo setting is interesting. So I guess to start out, you pitched this book, it sounds like. What was going on? Were you just looking like, hey, I got this idea, I've got this concept for the character. What about Cyclops made you want to dig deeper into him as an individual versus as part of a team?
Okay, so hopefully without digressing too much, I mean, he's always been my favorite X-person.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And it took me a long time to realize it was because he really kind of strongly reminds me of my dad.
Oh.
Which is not to say that I don't have, set twos and contretemps with my father, but like, my dad, whom I adore, is a pretty kind of inscrutable dude. But he kind of shoulders the burdens of everybody around him,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of does so largely kind of silently and without complaint. He'll just sort of pick up a screwdriver and just sort of do whatever needs doing. And, I know I'm sort of getting right into the weeds with sort of like psychobiography right from the
please.
But
that's what I come to an Alex Paknadel interview for, frankly.
But yeah, genuinely, it was, like I feel like, and it took me a long time to figure this out, like 20 years to figure this out. Like I feel like in a weird roundabout way, reading about Scott kind of gave me an insight into my dad's inner workings, because he's very phlegmatic and very kind of tight-lipped, not in a cold way, not in an aloof way, but just you ask him how he's doing and it's always fine, even if his leg's hanging off. That just to me is, but the Scott's role as kind of the older brother to kind of mutant kind, the David of mutant kind. He always has to be fine, right? Like no matter what's going on, he has to be fine. He has to stand up. Everyone else gets to freak out, with the exception of maybe Aurora, right? Everyone else gets to freak out. He doesn't get to freak out ever. And yeah, so that kind of and in terms of how it actually kind of got made, so I was. And this is absolutely true. I was I started work on Sentinels, and I was hugely excited about that. I had a full plate. That was one off the bucket list. I was working on Astonishing. I'd always wanted to work on X books throughout my entire career. Anything else felt greedy. But I was just walking through Central Park. Like every time I'm in NYC, like I go for these big long walks with Matt Rosenberg.
We know Matt.
Yeah,
what a nice guy.
He's the best. And I was running an idea past him. This idea, just because I thought it was cool, which was basically Scott Summers, no visor, thrown back on his own resources, in a very kind of self-contained, and I won't say it's kind of tonally similar, but something more sort of non-submersible, I guess, like Magneto Testament or Weapon X, something like that, but just basically Cyclops in the wilderness without the thing that kind of defines him. And I mean, Matt said to me, you have to pitch it, you have to pitch it. I said, oh no, look, I haven't been asked to pitch it. And he kind of bullied me into it. But that's been like the story of my kind of career. Like Christian Ward bullied me into emailing Tom Brevoort to ask to do an X book in the first place. Like I would never have done these things like on my own. It's always kind of someone kind of kicking me and going, if you don't do that, we're not friends anymore.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's to all of our benefit, right?
Yeah. I hope so.
I'll say this because it's not just in comics. In my professional life, one of the things that I got told early on in my career, and one thing that as I am not getting to the point where I'm one of the old hands, where I'm not the youngest guy in a group anymore, it's that no one is going to take control of your career but you. Like no one is going to have as much of a vested interest in it. And you got to take those shots, especially when you know that you've got the talent behind it or you can contribute. You're the one who's going to be you're the one who's going to have the most investment in what you're doing. No one else is thinking about you as much as you are. So I always advocate for people to say, hey, take your shot. What's the worst that happens? You get told no? Okay, well then that's not what's going to happen. You can move on and find something else.
I think that's the thing. I haven't been told to kind of bore off yet. It's always been at the very least. I know this is a digression, but like there's one editor out there who I think has said no to me every single time, but has done so within sort of 24 hours, which is a beautiful kindness in and of itself.
Yeah, you're not waiting.
You know what I mean? It's like I was saying, like I would crawl over glass for that editor because it's such a kind of just like ripping the Band-Aid off. It's a beautiful thing. I'm not going to waste your time. Thank you very much. But you're more than welcome to kind of send me another email. And that in itself, that's a lovely thing. I know realistically, most editors have inboxes that are multiples of thousands full, and that's not possible. But yeah, every time you do get kind of a quick turnaround, it's like, it's a beautiful thing.
Now, speaking of, editorial, this is a book that is part of a larger X office, right? Now, as of us recording, we don't really know where things are ending up because Age of Revelation is ending after we record this. We don't really know what's happening in Jed McKay's book, X-Men, in the coming weeks after that event wraps up.
Which for folks who aren't aware, that's the other book that Cyclops is in.
Yeah, X-Men. So how do you've got this pitch, you're putting it out into the world, X Office likes it. How do you figure out how to kind of slot this in so that you still get to tell the story that you want to tell, but it also fits into where this character is in terms of the larger story?
I again, hand God. I think in terms of accommodations that were made, um, I asked Jet. I asked Jed. Jed. Jed.
Let's
I
just call
asked
him Jet.
Jed.
Better.
Jed. Yeah, where did that come from? Yeah, like I asked Jed if I could break an X vehicle, and he said yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I'm very lucky. I mean, Jed and I are pretty close, so we coordinated quite closely. And I've sort of slid all the scripts sort of over his transom just to make sure that I wasn't stepping on any of his toes. Um, but the idea with this series is very much. I mean, it's interesting, kind of talking about like change paradigms, right?
Hmm.
So, and again, I'm not yucking anyone's yum at all. Like people have been saying, is he going to emerge from this with like a new power set? Is he going to emerge from this with a new costume or something?
Oh,
Right?
God, new
And
costume.
like that like those are
People
all
love new costumes, buddy. People love new costumes.
those are all kind of great questions. But I think like the thing that excited me about this, or the challenge of this, I think, was to sort of put him through more of a kind of internal change, which is not
Hmm.
to say that those things aren't going to happen, but the track that I was pursuing was that there's going to be a different kind of emotional status quo at the end of this.
Mm.
Okay.
And so it's not to say that it isn't sort of part of what's going on more broadly, because I do think that through the discussions that Jed and I have had, that sort of what I've done will kind of inform the character kind of going forward.
Hmm.
And you might see some characters cropping up here or there, but in the main, the ambition with this, and I know this is kind of, and I'm not trying to be like arrogant or anything. It's an ambition. It's not something that I think I've necessarily fulfilled. But the goal here was to create like an evergreen, right? So,
Hmm.
like, my favorite X anythings are generally, and I know they're not truly standalone, but like God Loves Man Kills has like consequences, right? But
Hmm.
like that first Wolverine mini, right? The
Hmm.
Claremont Miller one. I think like the X-Men are in it for a panel. There's like that, the wedding invitation, right? So you see them,
Right.
there's that. But other than that, it's kind of completely self-contained. Weapon X is completely self-contained. Magneto Testament is completely self-contained, and it's just I feel like it's a sort of it's a it's a very intense shot glass of that character.
Hmm.
Okay.
That's when I think kind of X-Men, for me anyway, is like at its best, or solo X-Men stories are at their best.
Mm.
Is when you're getting an insight into character over, I mean, sometimes in addition to, but mainly to kind of to sort of complement broader kind of plot development.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to do, is like, and again, I mean, I've said this kind of elsewhere. I'm not saying this is the definitive take on Cyclops. All I can state with any confidence is that it's my definitive take on
Mm.
Cyclops. Right? That's not that it doesn't contradict anybody else's. It's just how I see him. That's it.
Okay.
So jumping a little bit deeper into like the psychology of Cyclops and how you're approaching this character. I guess when I'm viewing the character, I have seen him very frequently defined by his relationship to other characters. He acts as a foil to folks like Jean in the Dark Phoenix saga, or Xavier, or Emma, or Wolverine, all these characters. He is like the reflection that they bounce off against and figure out, okay, who am I to the X-Men in relationship to this central X-Men figure? In a solo story, does that force you to change how you approach that character when he doesn't have those foils around him, and give him a bit more internality and focus, from inside out versus outside in?
Absolutely. And interestingly, the first thing I had to do was give him a foil within the story, a foil for him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because and I had all these discussions about because one of the things that I do quite frequently, right? I lean on narration quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I was, I spoke to a couple of writers, from the Krakoa era, And the advice I was given, and I think it's good advice, was basically just withhold as much access to Scott Summers as you can. So a narration, even if it's third person, kind of puts you in his head. So I was kind of, and again, I think it's the right decision. I was steered away from that. Or I was advised not to do that, because the more access we have to him, the more kind of knowable he becomes. And actually, one of the great benefits of Cyclops, or one of the great sort of gifts to you as a dramatist, is the fact that he is inscrutable. He is unreadable. One of the reasons why he's a foil for the other X-Men, and it's a really simple thing, right? You can't see his eyes.
Yeah.
And just dramatically, that's such an important thing. I mean, sorry, Zachary, like you mentioned a book I did, All Against All. One of the huge ongoing discussions we had throughout that, right, was, Casper and I wanted to.
Casper Wingard, who's currently drawing the Power Fantasy.
I beg your pardon, Casper Wingard, the great.
That's
Casper
not. I know you know who he is. That's for the general audience, because X-Men readers, God love them, may be a little insular.
But we went into that book, and the brief that we went in with, was that we wanted to depict aliens, right? It's, let's move away from kind of human morphology, 2 eyes, a mouth, whatever. Let's move away from that. But I also wanted to have those aliens as protagonists. And it's a weird realization that, because like that Avatar thing, man, the sort of James Cameron, like highly kind of anthropomorphized alien protagonists, you can't really get away from it, because as human beings, we're hardwired to empathize with things that at least correspond to us physiologically somewhat. We can't empathize with a slug. We can't do it. I mean, some of us can, don't get me wrong, lovely, lovely, lovely people. I'm not a lovely, lovely person, right? Like, I can't empathize with a slug. So, but little things like the fact that, you never see Scott Summers' eyes, it's a tremendous kind of barrier to any kind of understanding of the character. And it makes him, I mean, I think I've used the term elsewhere, it makes him kind of a highly polished surface. He makes him one of those characters that become almost, and this is Mariwa's term, like a proxy character, someone that, people see themselves in to a greater extent maybe than they do others. So, I mean, just going back to what I think were the sort of contours of your question, that was about 8 years ago, I apologize. But, my kind of way in was to kind of work with that inscrutability, was to go, okay, this character is like radically unknowable. How can I give character cues through action rather than thought? What is he doing that gives you an insight into his character?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, just diving a little bit deeper on that. From an artist standpoint, you've seen artists use that reflection, the fact that he is inscrutable, as an art cue and things. I mean, how many different panels, and I'm not knocking anyone for doing this because I think it's a great tool, are a character being reflected in Cyclops' visor. Like, yes, the focus is on Cyclops, but you're seeing yourself, or you're seeing their scene partner in him. I mean, I think that's a really powerful visual storytelling tool that often gets applied to that character that really emphasizes it. I think the other thing that, Cyclops hasn't had a lot of solo outings. There was the 05 book a couple of years, about a decade back, where he was in space, and it was a bit of a different approach to character. And then there's a Brian K. Vaughan series from about 25 years ago. And I love Brian K. Vaughan. I read Spectators over the weekend. I got it from the library and checked that out. But his series, I always remember the immediate beginning of it, because it gets into Cyclops' thoughts. Like, it starts with that narration of his, and it is something to the effect of how Republicans don't wear jeans, and that's why Cyclops doesn't vote Republican. And it was it was a very Brian K. Vaughan thing to write, and it was such a weird, like, is this how Cyclops would think? Is this my character? That it's always been so dissonant to me. And I think that's a challenge with a character like Cyclops, who you do not get to see the internality of. as much. And I'm very interested to see how you approach it in this book.
Well, I mean, I don't think I'm giving too much away here. I mean, the sort of the thing that I had kind of typed out above my desk, just as a kind of pole star throughout, was, my working hypothesis is that the reason he had friction with Logan early on from sort of Giant Size X-Men 1 onwards is because it's not because they're too dissimilar, it's because they're too similar. The difference being when Logan cuts loose, yes, there's a trail of bodies. What there isn't is, some sand where a city used to be.
Right.
Right. That's the difference, I think, is, his initial resentment of Logan again, in my head canon, stems from the fact that everyone he gets to cut loose and Scott just doesn't, and he can't. And so I think the sort of pressure cooker analogy is quite sort of opposite. Here's a guy but he also has to kind of hide behind this visor, but he has to be over controlled in absolutely every aspect of his life. I mean, I'm sure you've had it, it's been depicted before, but when he goes to sleep at night, he has to wear sort of ruby quartz goggles, because if he wakes up from a nightmare, what happens? If it gets bumped in the night, what happens? Everybody dies. And just having to be controlled to that extent. So, I mean, this story removes the visor almost from the jump. And then the sort of the narrative question that I suppose I'm asking is, well, who is this guy without it? Who is he without that recourse?
Were there other stories along that vein where he loses his visor that you went back to and said, okay, what about this? I know Claremont did it a few times. It's been depicted in me. Was there one of those that you looked and said, I like where they're exploring with this, I'd like to go deeper on it?
Again, I'm sorry, I can't give you chapter and verse. It was a
you're all good.
It was a Claremont one, I think, where we borrowed the kind of we stole the aesthetic, but there's one where Scott finds this sort of savage. It was where Cockrum came back briefly
with Magneto and his Octopus Island.
There you go.
Yes, I know which one. I know where you're going on this.
There you go. Yeah, no, mainly aesthetically, but that's what we kind of that's what it was very much kind of hairy chested, hairy chested, sexy Scott with a bandage kind of tied around his head. That's
for folks at home. That's 148 to 150 of Uncanny. If you want to,
there you go.
Somewhere around there. I know it's around. It's leading up to 150. I don't know the exact thing where it starts. I would say that it is an idea that people have jumped into before, but I think it's because it is such an effective tool to explore who this character is. How do you, if this is his support, this is what he has to keep himself under control. The first question that any writer is going to ask is, well, what if he loses that? What does that mean for the character? And it's a great way to dive into it.
I think even in an early draft of the pitch, I described it as a control rod in a nuclear reactor. Yeah. So exactly that. And then the pressure starts building.
For me personally, there was an episode of the show X-Men Evolution, which was the teen X-Men in the early 2000s. And I think I was 11 years old when that came out. So I was right there oh no, this is my jam. And he gets thrown into a desert in Mexico or something, doesn't have his visor and I remember he has to recount his steps in a fight to go backwards and pick up some glasses or something to hide his eyes for the rest of the thing. It was a very small moment, but very illustrative of this is what the character thinks about. This is the level of control that he's always working with.
Damn, that's smarter than anything I've done. That's that's great. It's too late to steal it.
Now, we mentioned art before, but you are working with Roger Antonio on this book.
Yeah.
X fans probably know Roger's work from Parts of Hellions with Zeb Wells, and pretty much the entire run of the most recent volume of Deadpool. How did you get paired up with Antonio? And why is he a perfect fit for what you're doing?
I was paired with him kind of arbitrarily, right? So we were looking at artists, and the editor on the book, Darren Shan, who has really good instincts in that direction, and many
Mhm.
others. Like genuinely it was the first name he put to me, and
Mhm.
I'd worked with Roge on Carnage, a couple issues of Carnage.
Oh, right.
Yeah, like
with Normie Osborn, the Red Goblin guy.
it was part of that crossover, the Carnage Reigns. But I did it.
Okay.
So when Ram left Carnage,
That's right.
I closed it out. So I had a couple issues to sort of lead into Carnage Reigns.
That's right. That's right.
And I remember at the time, very kind of selfishly thinking, like, I'm going to steal this dude because this is great. Like he has a real storytelling chops and
Mhm.
a real kind of eye for horror.
Mhm.
I was doing all these kind of like Cletus Cassidy kind of feeding people bits of himself and all, and Rose just was game for all of it, right? And was just so much more gruesome than even I had hoped. So I was absolutely delighted. So I was paired with Roge, and everything I've asked for, he has delivered and more. I mean, I know that sounds like a sales pitch, but it isn't. It's like I think no matter, I'm very confident saying this. I think like no matter what people make of the book, obviously I hope people love it. But whether or not they like what I've done, I know they're going to love what Roge has done.
Mm.
The-
Well, I'm curious because you're saying, he's good at horror elements. We really haven't touched on at all. You mentioned the foil of this book. At least from the solicits, it looks like that is Donald Pierce, and the Reavers. So are we getting into sort of like android mecha human horror stuff as part of this book, or is that not
Yeah,
really where you wanted to take
I mean,
it?
I think there are some preview pages up online right now that are kind of a bit of a giveaway,
Mhm.
but just because I know you've been through sort of these are new Reavers, um,
Oh,
but
okay.
they are they're all kind of built from the ground up, but it's all very much um, it's like I think again just in my head canon, I think Pierce felt that like the process of becoming a Reaver, whether it was in the body shop or whatever, was just entirely too comfortable. So this is very much just Donald Pierce with a blowtorch and a bone saw, hacking people up, and
Wow.
like various kind of limbs and hanks of gristle on the floor, fly blown. Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Now,
But it's also it's all kind of hinges on that sort of central irony of here are these people who are going to passionately defend humanity by not being human anymore.
Mm.
right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, you mentioned Donald Pierce being the antagonist on this. Solicits have been talked through. Was he part of your initial like concept for this book for Cyclops, or were you looking for, okay, who can I slide in to be an antagonist on this? And kind of expressed himself through the process.
Well, honestly, I mean, I would say because I mentioned kind of Weapon X,
Hmm.
but also the other kind of pillar of that kind of dyad, I guess, is Wolf in Winter, and like we borrowed a lot from Wolf in Winter.
Hmm.
Mm.
That's the Barry Windsor Smith Claremont one,
Yeah,
the one that looks really good that y'all know. If you're listening to this podcast, but just to remind you, he's fighting in the snow. It looks beautiful. It's great.
fighting in this. Yeah, Wolverine like a sort of at last gasp, but just with it's a very kind of like it's a lone wolf and cub dynamic, and we have a
Yep.
lone wolf and cub dynamic as well,
Mm.
albeit to kind of lesser extent. but the Reavers were the antagonists in that, and I was kind of because I already kind of went in with this, like the setup was almost kind of freestanding. It was just
Right.
Scott Summers, Wilderness, no visor, go. And rather than sort of, I thought it would just be a good idea to kind of just wear the influence on the sleeve. And also, there's so much focus on their hatred for Logan.
Mm-hmm.
That the first thing that crossed my mind was, oh, they're going to underestimate this guy. They think that they think he's the over controlled one. They think that he's the one who's going to kind of play by the rules. And again, other people's mileage may vary. Like, I don't think that's who Scott Summers is. I think the rules are a proxy, but I think when there are no rules, run away.
Speaking of breaking rules, you kind of got into this most recent era of X-Men by pitching a book that I think was a pretty big swing, and was solicited as such. That was Sentinels. So I'm curious how you feel now that that book has kind of come out and been enjoyed by readers. How are your feelings on how that went?
I mean, I didn't quite pitch it.
Okay.
No, which is not to say that I will happily take credit for all of it. But the idea of humanoid sentinels, human sentinels dispatched to round up prisoners for Grey Malkin was brought to me. Everything else I was given almost a completely free hand.
Okay. How about the aspect of them each being, because I thought this was a clever element of it, was that each of them had been kind of traumatized by a past X crossover or some kind of superhero, conflict, that had made them decide to be part of this team.
Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned this kind of elsewhere. I mean, it was funny because we almost like that. I think I could be wrong. I'm sure you'll be able to correct me if I am. I think mine was the only book, or ours was the only book where we almost could kind of put in a kind of an introductory editorial just to kind of go like, look, we're aware of the concerns here, basically.
So I think that's really interesting what you're talking about, because when you're talking about comics specifically, like superhero comics are one of the very few genres that, and I think Jay Edited is the first one I heard this through, and I love this discussion, that explicitly labels morality. Like, these are the good characters, these are the bad characters. And the audience is trained to say, no, this is good, I root for these ones, these are the bad characters, they're evil, I shouldn't be putting any ideas or any of my like thought process into reading or experiencing the bad guys. It sounds like you're actually touching on one of the questions that we were going to ask, is that there's some unique complications that come from writing a story where, the Sentinels are the explicit bad guys of X-Men, but there's a lot more morality to it that you can dive into. Like, what makes someone do that? And how do you explore those gray areas in a genre that is so black and white so often?
Well, I think that was it. Like, I remember, I mean, sorry, but like this is maybe strong meat, but I remember, years ago, like someone asked Spielberg, why he felt kind of compelled to make Schindler's List, and obviously, beyond the story itself, what I think he kind of intended it as a kind of corrective, because he felt slightly, I don't know if guilty is the right word, but he felt some responsibility for the kind of caricaturing of Nazis, with Raiders.
Yeah.
That he'd sort of depicted them as kind of these sort of cartoonish buffoons, rather than, the worst people who have ever lived, and continue to be. Now, but I don't think, you know. By the way, and I want to preface this by saying I don't think that people who, you know, some people liked it. I know others were more critical. Others were um, discomforted by it, and I
Hmm.
understand that discomfort. And I'm not saying that people who didn't like it didn't get it. I'm
Hmm.
sure. I'm sure. There are plenty of people who got it who still didn't care for it. But I do think, and I maintain that comic book readers and ex-readers are smart, and they could and they can appreciate complexity.
Hmm.
And what I was striving to do, um, and I think, I'm very proud of the book. I think what I was trying to highlight was this, and it felt very kind of timely, and unfortunately it still is, if anything more so. Um, but most people who carry out evil works under the aegis of officialdom, right,
Hmm.
are just doing a job. That's but it's the banality of evil. It
Right.
was a book. It's a book about the banality of evil. I even I very Gail very kindly let me use that diner from the kind of primer
Hmm.
the sort of from the ashes primer. She let me use that diner where I had um, one of the sort of one of I had one of the main characters talking to his son, who's this huge Dazzler fan,
Right.
and it's abundantly clear, like, he doesn't hate mutants. He doesn't hate
Right.
mutants. He can see an argument that well, uh, they're angry. They had their kind of paradise island taken away from them, and angry people tend to act out.
Right.
And of course, he's wrong, demonstrably, palpably wrong. But that's also, most people, when they carry out works, that historians blench at decades later. At the time, and it's horrifying, right? At the time, they're drawing a check and then they
Yeah.
punch out. It's not,
Right.
it's the hatred is institutional,
Yeah.
right? It's not. It's not. I don't want to say it's not personal, but like, it's not kind of viscerally felt. It's an institutional hatred,
Hmm.
and then they go home and they forget about it, and that's ugly. But that's what I wanted to kind of get into, because I
One.
didn't think you'd seen that before. It's always been, I hate mutants. It's passionately, vociferously anti-mutant, rather than, well, someone's told me to go get them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I felt like we hadn't necessarily seen dramatized before. I mean, of course we have, but like, I hadn't seen it.
And I'll tell you, I sat down and I had not read that series as like a complete unit of a complete work from front to back. I read it like weekly when it was coming out. And I was like, okay, as I was reading it this weekend, yeah, that absolutely came through, that these are people and what they're doing is horrific,
Mhm.
but they are humans. Like, it is hard for people to put themselves in the situation that everyone has that same level of like a universe within them, and they have their own personhood. And it's very easy to paint people, especially people you disagree with, as just a monolith of, you do not have this depth and complexity. And I don't think there's anything wrong with art focusing on, hey, what makes this person be like that? Like, that's what complexity is. Heck, like, okay, I'm gonna make myself look like an erudite, but like, that's what Crime and Punishment is. Like, Raskolnikov is not like a good dude, but Dostoevsky focuses really deeply on, who is this guy? What makes him want to go murder a landlord for no reason? Like, who is he? And I think that's where you can get some really fruitful stuff. And I think that's one of the things that Sentinels did, was focus on those characters. And I was very interested in that aspect of it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Like, I mean, as I said, it's there was a lot of work that went into it, in terms of, I mean, from Justin Mason as well, who I think really helped me kind of become a better kind of action choreographer.
Hmm.
Because he kind of really sort of excels in those kind of big moments. But it was kind of finding like one of the things I found throughout, however long I've been at Marvel or been working with Marvel is, I've always found myself working with kind of like I think of it as like cut scenes, so like, oh well, what happened in this sort of 5 seconds where in the first meeting of the Illuminati, how do I get how do I thread the needle of kind of how does Mantis go from being like a plant person to like animal again and back and all this stuff. And I find that I sort of work with that quite a bit, and so I did a lot of that. I mean, again, the Sentinels all sort of having backstories based in sort of Marvel events, and there's an Onslaught bit, and it's not necessarily kind of like to build pathos. It's more in terms of, I guess, trying to not excuse behaviors at all, not excusing behaviors at all, but just kind of, I'm always interested in the, like almost like Rashomoning it. You know what I mean? Just like try. I really like it when, particularly in these sort of shared universes, these incredibly kind of rich tapestries, you end up with these sort of multiple perspectives. And I just think it makes the whole richer, and it doesn't condone any set of behaviors whatsoever. I just think it kind of, every villain becomes more compelling when they have a reason to be doing what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Now, you mentioned shared universe. This is a book that kind of is nested inside of what Gale was doing with the Grey Malcolm prison. So I'm curious, do you find having those kind of restrictive parameters of being able to, like, needing to tell a story that has to exist within the rules of what she's doing, is that helpful? Is it limiting?
It would only be if Gale hadn't been Gale, it would have been limiting.
Okay.
But Gale's incredibly approachable, and incredibly kind of collegiate, and is always happy to, like, again, I mean, it was a minute ago, but I can't recall a single instance where I had to change something to accommodate Gale. It was always the other way around.
Well,
That's interesting.
And like, and again, through consult, but like, I would always kind of consult with Gale, and like, I think with the kind of the Sentinel dogs as well, like we got to play with them earlier than Gale and David did. David designed them. Like, David was kind of like handing us, here are the designs. You want to do kind of a prototype of these things. Go. This is what they can do. This is what they can't do. Go for it. So we actually got to use them first, which was incredibly generous.
Yeah.
That's
David Marquez, the artist on Uncanny.
Yeah. So yeah, we got to kind of like, Gale even like let us like blow up a couple of spots and stuff. It was pretty great. So yeah, I mean, I didn't feel any kind of hot breath on that basis.
So
the only, but I mean, there was the one. I mean, if the one time where things they didn't get fraught at all, but where it became kind of an active discussion, and it was bizarrely fruitful. Right? Was so issue 1. Candidly and upfront, like I'm a kind of OG Omega Red fan. I like Omega Red as like a very, very, very nasty individual,
right?
And it was brought up from the jump. Well, like, hang on, you can't just depict Omega Red as this sort of unremitting, unrepentant villain, because all of this character work's been done with Rossovich,
with Percy.
He had a baby tiger. There's a whole thing.
Yeah, like on Krakoa, right? So you can't just do this like instant heel turn. And we were kind of cutting back and forth, and I don't think it was my idea, but I think it might have been Darren's or Mark Basso's. But someone said, well, like, hang on, why don't you? We understand that you need to get him to this point, right? That he is someone that the Sentinels are going to kind of consider a target. So why not just take an arc of Astonishing X-Men, the digital book that I was doing, and basically just kind of backfill it, just like show him, he's had this kind of Damaskene conversion, right, on Krakoa, and he goes home, he goes to his sort of the village where he comes from, and suffers a sort of unimaginable tragedy, and that causes him not to do a kind of complete not to do a complete heel turn, but you have this situation, and again this sort of multi-perspective, the sort of Kurosawa thing of, if you only read Sentinels, he's a monster, right? Like, he's killed a bunch of people. But if you read Astonishing, oh, they came at him. And you don't see that instead. So you're only viewing it through the Sentinels kind of perspective, which is, here's this monster that we need to take down. But if you read Astonishing, you get all this kind of backstory that I hope kind of enriches it. I mean, I was asked I was so grateful that Marvel kind of were packaging the From the Ashes arcs as physical floppies. Because, I mean, the one thing that again, the boat sailed, but I would have loved to have had that Omega Red story packaged with the Sentinels trade.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But the fact that it's available physically, I think is, that's still beyond my kind of, at least it's, at least you're going to be able to kind of read them as companion pieces,
One thing when, talking about restrictions on storytelling, like how that impacts how you approach things. Back, and this was about 15 years ago, I got very into the card game Magic the Gathering. And the lead developer on that, a guy named Mark Rosewater, constantly had a line that was, restrictions breed creativity. That was his perspective on it. Is he was not a blank sheet of paper guy. He was a draw me a frame of something and let me fill it in. Like, tell me what I can't do. What's your approach on that? Are you more of a blank sheet of paper, like, I got all these ideas and I got to get them out? Or are you someone who really thrives with a bit of that structure of, well, we have this prison, or we have Cyclops who, is leading this team and dealing with this stuff in Alaska. What can you do with that? Or are you more of a, I know that this is an X-Men thing and my restriction is that big letter X on the top, I can make something out of that?
It's interesting. I was again clang, but I was talking to Dennis Camp about this the other day.
Dennis Camp from, I don't know, every big comic right now.
Everything. But we were talking about, I think it was like Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. Like, we have very interesting, like, 4 a.m. chats, right?
Sure.
And just in terms of sort of defining, because it's interesting that the most extreme elements in our society will often mutilate the concept of freedom to their own ends, right? Free speech. Well, free speech for me, but not for thee, etc. And we were just talking about this idea of Haraway's, where she kind of defines, because we don't really have a sort of working definition of freedom that's useful, right? There's like negative liberty, positive liberty, all these kind of concepts from Isaiah Berlin. But Donna Haraway has this formulation that's really beautiful, right? Which is, defining the good life, I think, as finite freedom and modest meaning in suffering. So the reality is, like, we can't have infinite freedom, because infinite freedom impinges on the freedom of others by definition, right? If your freedom is infinite, eventually it's going to abut and encroach on other people's freedom. But instead of thinking of it, instead of thinking of finite freedom as oppression, think of it as structure, as a scaffold, something to build on. And I've always found continuity to be liberating in that sense. I mean, I mentioned earlier on, probably the vast majority of Marvel work that I've done has been in the form of like intertext. So like when I was doing Red Goblin, like, I mean, I'm perfectly like, okay, so I've been handed a toolkit by basically Al Ewing and Ron V, and oh right, I can see my way through this clearly because of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I actually find those kind of structures quite liberating, because it gives me like a crash barrier that keeps me on the road.
Now,
You know what
this
I mean?
is something that ties directly into something I wanted to ask you about, because if you look at the Infinity Comics stuff that you've been doing, you've a lot of these are interstitial stories. You've got a chance to explore Magneto or Beast, or I don't think you did the Beast one.
I did the Beast one. Yeah,
you did the Beast one. Havoc. In some cases, you're resetting status quos for characters. How much of these are you saying, like, I just need an opportunity to talk a little bit more about these characters and dive into them, versus what you were describing, where it's like point A and point B may already be decided, and I get to kind of like fill that gap with something that I find interesting? Like,
very,
do you
very
get
much
to
the latter.
decide point
Sorry.
B, or is point B like that landmark has already been set out for you?
Generally, point B has been. I mean, so the Havoc one's a great example, right? So in X Factor 1, which I think was in X Factor 1, like he's not a rotting corpse anymore.
Sure.
But the brief was really open ended. It was basically, okay, how do you want to get him to that point? And I thought that was kind of worth backfilling, because I got to work with Maddie, who's a fantastic character. And again, I mean, I had a sort of, I had some very passionate people telling me, like, don't break him up. But I had other people going, get him together with Lorna. So, you have all these kind of different, countervailing kind of currents, kind of sort of crashing into you at the time. And you just have to kind of be respectful to both, but also stay true to the story that you want to tell. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just kind of building off ramps from the sort of Krakoan status quo to sort of take people where they needed to be, sort of in from the ashes, which I didn't, I never viewed that as, I really didn't view it as drudge work at all, because I was getting to work with some really, really big characters. In order to kind of give them a new sort of emotional status quo, or in some cases like a physical. Like the Xavier one was huge. The fact that, like, he didn't kill those people, like, that was a huge, like, reveal, right? Like, so I got to do that in Astonishing. And so, some of them I would say I had, there was more editorial involvement, particularly with the Xavier one, because that was quite big. There was a lot of discussion there between myself, Darren, and Tom. But I sometimes feel like there's a perception out there that a lot of stuff is kind of editorially mandated, but that's not how these guys operate. They don't hire people to be stenographers, right? Like, they don't hire people to kind of execute their vision. They hire you because they think you might have one. And if they like it, they don't really get in the way. And if anything, everything, I mean, certainly, I mean, again, my relationship with Darren, my relationship with Tom has always been very respectful and collegiate. And it's always been, how do you feel about this? And I'm consulted, right? Like, it's, and if I'm very, very passionate about something, I'm free to kind of make my case vociferously, but like equally respectfully. It was I was given a point B, but like how I got there was like, as long as I didn't, that's the thing, as long as you don't break the toys, as long as you don't break the sandbox, you are given a potentially like frightening amount of freedom.
I think it's very interesting, because like your first X-Men related thing, I think when we had you on the podcast last, it was about the Maggot story that you did in Infinity Comics. And again, love Maggot. He's my boy. I would not call him a premier or prestige X-Men character. So I think it's very different when you have, who cares what happens to Maggot? Like me, but that's it. Like, I'm only buying one of these things. I'm not the general audiences. I think it's a very different approach when you're working with some of the more A-list characters on there, the ones that, people know from movies and media and all that stuff.
I mean, I'd agree with that. and I mean, I sort of I touched on it earlier on, but there are also again, I was talking to Mariwa about this, right? Like there are these kind of proxy characters within that. There are characters that people like intensely identify with, and they're not necessarily who you'd think, right? So if you ask, if you ask a sort of a casual comics reader who they would imagine that the big X proxy character would be, they'd immediately say Wolverine. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
People, I don't think, identify with Wolverine very much. I think they identify with Cyclops. I think they identify with Storm. I think they identify with Magic. And there's
Well,
just
I think with Wolverine, it's very specifically the same type of person who is going to be active online in a community about this stuff is not necessarily the Wolverine guy.
I would agree with that. Yeah, you're right, and obviously, the online community as well is it's a window into the wider world. It isn't necessarily a representative window. So I take that. You take your point. It's like someone said a while ago. Sorry, digression, but
Oh, you're good.
there are people who read Batman who like just read Batman. There are people who go into comic stores month in, month out, and they buy everything Batman and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge number of people. There are people who just go in there to buy Spawn, right? But it's this weird kind of like undiscovered country. They're not particularly voluble. They don't particularly make their kind of feelings known. They just very quietly go in month after month after.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of these people.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, of course, that's a massive consideration. But yeah, when you're dealing with more prominent characters, I think as well. I mean, I know this isn't what you asked, but that it's not pressure, that responsibility. I take it very, very seriously. But also, when I sit down to write, if that's top of mind the whole time, it just leads to paralysis. So, like, I almost, and like, to be very clear, I know I didn't, but I almost have to put myself in a headspace where, like, I invented this character because that's the only way I can sort of give myself enough freedom to tell the story that I want to tell.
I like that approach. That's it's very interesting. Now, we've got a couple, as we're wrapping up here, a couple of questions that folks asked us to ask you. So we want to jump in to a couple of our listener questions. I think Adam got them from where? Blue Sky?
These are all from Blue Sky, so
I'm sure no one has bothered you on social media to ask you these questions directly. So,
well, I did notice, Alex, a couple maybe a week or two ago, you did open yourself up to some Cyclops questions, and people they got on there. They got on your replies.
It turns out people like Cyclops. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if people have noticed that.
So if these are questions that folks have already thrown at you, we apologize. But these were just things that when we said we're going to be talking to you, they wanted to know. So here are three. We'll start with this one. Agent X710 on Blue Sky asks, what is your preferred Cyclops optic beam sound effect? And this is an interesting question because my colleague Dan Grote and I at Comics XF actually went back and did the history of Zark recently. Because I think people think that that's the signature. Like, why doesn't Cyclops have a signature sound effect is an interesting question. I'm curious, what is your preferred Cyclops sound effect, or should he not have a signature sound effect?
Great question. I do use Zark, right, in issue 1.
Nice.
But I don't think I'm giving too much away here. For the scene where he doesn't have his visor and he just, he's, he has no kind of control mechanism whatsoever. I went silent.
Oh,
Yeah, because
Holdo maneuver.
well, no, just do you know what? It was you remember in Oppenheimer,
Oh yeah.
right? Where
Mhm.
where you see the Flash,
Mhm.
and it's so the blast is so overwhelming. There is no sound, at least to begin with.
Mhm.
Um, like that was where I kind of went with it. Was just it's such an overwhelming force. There is no sound. Your
When you're
eardrums burst
when you're
immediately.
scripting generally, are you a sound effects guy, or is that not something that you think of?
I am a sound effects guy. Dan
Okay.
Waters takes the piss out of me for it constantly and is always urging me to rip them out
Mhm.
because he thinks that, it's like, okay, grandpa. like, um,
Well,
and
I
I,
know there's differing schools of thought on the
yeah, because
approach.
I mean, I think I mean, again, I mean, I hope I'm not, I think like Ellis, like made it sort of de rigueur to
Yeah,
like rip them out.
it was very much, that's I think of the widescreen comics boom in the early 2000s. It's like that first, the Ellis Miller stuff that was really pushing like, hey, let's move away from these things. And that has a lot of influence in a lot of the British comic scene. I
Sure.
think even a bigger hold on it than it does some of the US creators who may have larger ties to historic superheroes where Britain had a bit more diversity in what comics were and could be. And I think that opened up that mind of, well, it doesn't have to have sound effects.
I think, yeah. And I mean, I think that's valid, but I also, like my dad taught me to read with like Marvel Treasury editions,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
just um, so I have a lot of affection for them. Um, and also, I mean, again, it's if they are if they're if they're kind of lazily executed, then yeah, fine, I understand it. But like like all of like Frank Quitely's like diegetic
Mm-hmm.
SFX, in Batman and Robin and stuff. I mean, beautiful, right? I also like I'm a huge sucker for like like Walt Simonson SFX, where like
Yeah.
That's
the
the gold
panel
standard right there,
contained
baby.
within the sound, and it's
Yeah.
just awesome. I think it really adds to like the language of comics. I think I even stole one of those for like a Casey Jones thing like a couple issues back.
Mm-hmm.
Someone getting just a whack, but like the whole panel is contained within it. Like I love that stuff. So yeah, but I mean just to return to your question, yeah. So I think Zark is the sort of signature move, but yeah, when there's no visor, it's I just see it as it's absolutely silent because your eardrums have burst and you can't hear anything anymore.
Wow. All right. Kim on Blue Sky asks, Scott has a reputation for being a superb hand-to-hand combatant. What is fun about scripting fight scenes with him?
The fact that most of that is taken away from him here, candidly,
Oh,
he can't
okay.
see, right?
Yeah.
And there were like early discussions about, oh well, like maybe he's like, and by the way, which is not to say that he absolutely can do stuff and does do stuff,
Yeah.
but it's he's not Matt Murdock, right? Like it's not elegant.
Mm.
It's I mean I think because I mean again just taking away the visor is a metaphor as much as anything. It's taking away all of his kind of support mechanisms, and one of
Mm-hmm.
them is like he can't. I mean, again, I don't think I'm giving too much away because it's in the preview, but you'll see in the preview pages, the opening scene. I tried to, depict him absolutely in control,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely
Mhm.
in control.
Mhm.
Using the kind of geometry of a room to his advantage, and this is all about removing that control, right? So he doesn't have a compass, he doesn't really know which way is north, he's being guided by someone else. So everything's just a little bit more kind of rough and ready.
Mm-hmm.
So he is a superb hand-to-hand combatant, he is a superb strategist, but one of the themes of the book is when that's taken away from him, what is he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. We have one last question. This is more of a headcanon question.
Sure.
I'm
It can
sure
be real
this
if Alex wants it to be.
He
Make
can,
this
'cause
official right
he's-
now.
he can
Those
make it
wikis
canon.
are publicly editable.
Is this the,
Anyone
punch,
can just
is this
throw it
the
on
punch
there.
dimension? Am I getting the punch dimension
We're
question?
not
No.
gonna-
The punch
it's
dimension
not a
is real
punch
and people
dimension
think too much
question.
about it. They're also
Yeah.
lasers. It's fine.
I already got your official on this. You said punch dimension is canon. You
Oh, no.
believe in it.
Yeah, no. Sorry. It is canon. Al Ewing's Ultimates 2, you have the dimension of infinite concussive force.
Right.
So it's real. America Chavez has been there, but it is not connected to Scott Summers.
Interest. Okay, this is
okay. That's a wrinkle.
This is getting into some interesting weeds. Not at all what we were going to ask.
No, this is not what I was going to ask.
Here's the thing: the punch dimension is incredibly dumb. Like it was.
It's
someone
not. It's fantastic, but I understand why. I understand why it was kind of like quietly elided. Like at present, he is a solar battery, and that solar energy is kind of turned into concussive force, right?
In my mind, it's the good dumb that you get from comics having to be built like 8 buildings on top of each other.
Pure comics. It's beautiful. And also, like, I mean, someone pointed out as well the other day, and I hope this doesn't get me into trouble, but the thing that, if his eyes are portals to the dimension of infinite concussive force, which they are not, but if they were, it would explain the problem of the third law of motion, which is like, why does he not break his neck every time Dick Blast strikes anything, right? It would solve that problem. But also, the punch dimension is kind of dumb. So I can understand why they got rid of it.
Punch dimension, very dumb. I will say, when Al Ewing brought that, and that was, a decade ago at this point? Shoot. But when he did that in Ultimates, I hooted and hollered, because that was the, okay, yes, I knew he was one of us, but I didn't realize just like how sick and twisted in the head he was that he was like, no, but we have to make her punch into the punch dimension and have the punch dimension hit something else.
I will say this, right, and I've heard this from kind of multiple. I've only been on, like, he's a friend, so like I see him in other contexts, right? But like I've only been on like a proper creative Zoom with him a couple times, but everyone I know who is in the room, who does go to those writer summits, just says that like Al's the best person in the room ever. He's just so mercurial, like, because he has an improv background, right?
Mm-hmm.
So his brain goes to yes and all the time, right? So he will, if you want these kind of continuity fixes, like I had one in this, right, in terms of sort of what people are actually looking for. I won't go too far into it. And I just called Al, and I was like, man, like I just can't. And he had it within 15 seconds. It was ridiculous. Like he's a real, like I just feel like, like rocket science's loss is comics' gain, like he would have had us to like Jupiter by now, but like we get him instead, and that's fantastic.
All right, so last question from Charlie Etheridge Nunn.
The real question.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad we got that on that aside. That was great.
To talk about the punch dimension, it's right there. And I had to explain the punch dimension to my wife the other day. She did not care for it.
Had to.
I chose to. It had come up. And she was like, "Wait, is this real?" Because she doesn't read comics, she doesn't care about this stuff, and God bless her for it. Keeps me in check. But
my wife calls them the silly cartoons.
There you go.
Yeah,
accurate.
It's beautiful. I think it provides a level of balance in a relationship that keeps everyone honest. But to get to explain the punch dimension and say, no, I'm 100% serious about it. This is as real as any of this other stuff is. She's just like, how do you take any of it seriously? That's the trick, babe. You don't.
Yeah.
You enjoy it for what it is. And you just remember that it's just sometimes there's a punch dimension. You're okay.
Yeah.
What's Cyclops' music taste like? That's the real question. That's the real question.
Do you know what? I think he's a real. I think he's a real MOR guy. I think he's into yacht rock.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think he's into like, you know what I mean? Like Christopher Cross,
Michael McDonald's.
Yeah, 100%.
Scott sitting there listening to Boz Skaggs, just like
Yeah, like
really
Steely
enjoying
Dan. I
life.
think Scott's like super into Steely Dan.
Dad
Like,
rock.
yeah, I
Love this.
100%. Like for me anyway. Just and like that's not even like I'm not even kind of superimposing my dad anymore. Like I just kind of think like he just because it's functional, right? Like it's yep, that's what music does.
I've always
done music
said,
now.
Love this. I love this answer.
because I'm a music guy, so I've always been like, Cyclops doesn't like cool bands. He doesn't
Yeah,
like.
no, 100%
There's
not
no
right.
way.
Like, yeah,
No way.
he
No
like if he's sad,
way.
he listens to Sailing.
Oh, that's great. So, Alex, I really appreciate the time. What else that we didn't get to touch on should people know that you've got going on, or if they're interested in what you got with Cyclops, where else from your body of work do you think they should take a look?
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. So I got some creator-owned books I'm very proud of. I did one a couple of years ago called All Against All with Caspar Wingard that is very personal. It's a bit of a kind of 180 from what I've done with Cyclops, but there are probably points of. In fact, no, they're probably quite similar. There's a book.
Oh, that book rips, by the way. Like that,
Thank you.
legitimately, because I did an interview with you before it came out, but legitimately, that book was one that I enjoyed every single time it came out. I was like, yeah, this is scratching an itch.
Thank you kindly. Yeah, I'm immensely proud of it, and I think Caspar is too. So Sentinel's book came out last year. I think the trade Necessary Monsters is still available in your friendly local comic book store. Increasingly, like Marvel are kind of putting out collections of the Astonishing run. That I think there is a trade collection of From the Ashes, my like entire Astonishing run, with the wonderful Philip Seavey and Diogenes Neves. I think that's coming out maybe April. So keep an eye out for that. Last year or so, I did some. The Simon Spurrier was very kind and let me do some Flash stuff. So I did a Shade special that I think people can still get hold of. And I did a Dormammu one shot that I don't know. It was part of the Bring on the Bad Guys event. I'm hugely proud of it, and because I found that I did a Spider-Man Darkhold one shot a few years ago that had this like insane second life. People picked it up at the time, and it was real messed up. But this Dormammu one is like equally messed up, and I'm quietly kind of keeping my fingers crossed that this one sort of has a similar sort of half-life because I'm very proud of it. But yeah, that's me. Anyway.
I'll have to check that one out. That one missed me when it first came out. I just hadn't. I am not as tied into the comics ecosystem as I used to be, so a lot of things just fly past. I'll have to go and check that out.
It was basically a 1920s Lovecraftian Dormammu cult in London.
Okay.
Ooh, that sounds fun. Okay.
That's
pretty gnarly.
And Alex, if people want to follow you on social media, is there any place that they should be looking?
Sure, I'm on Blue Sky. That's probably where I'm most active. I do have a kind of like placeholder account on Twitter, but
it's what it is.
Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook. I'm pretty ubiquitous. I'm sorry to say, but yeah, great. I mean, if you want to like actually have like a conversation with me, like Blue Sky is probably the best.
Great. Okay, good.
Well, Alex, we truly appreciate the time today. It was great. Thank you so much for going on. Adam, anything we've got going on that we need to let the folks know about?
Comics XF, we did an update on our 2025 New Year's resolutions. So check that out. You can see whether we succeeded or not. And I think that's about it. You can follow me on social, Blue Sky and Instagram, Adam Reck. And Zach, what are we doing next week?
Next week is Battle of the Atom Funny Weed Number episode, so we're going to do something based on that. It'll be a great time, everybody. In fact, we had to rearrange our schedule so that we could actually do that and fit in this interview, which perfectly worked out with everyone involved and also giving us a break for Christmas. So we had that going, which is nice. But until then, folks, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience.
Get it!